Normally, I would say that I'm very happy to see you all here this evening, that I'm glad that so many people showed up to hear our distinguished speaker. However, I cannot say that. I wish none of you were here tonight. I wish Fred Guttenberg wasn't here, because he is here to talk about an appalling personal loss, an atrocity in our society, a pattern of violence that is grotesque, ongoing, and unnecessary. Fred Guttenberg knows things that no one wants to know, but things we should all try to understand. For that reason, I'm not happy, but I am grateful that Fred is here, and heartened that so many from our community came to listen. Fred graduated from Skidmore in 1988 with a degree in management and business, which I do believe has served him very well. Over the years, Fred has been a successful executive, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. This includes a decade at Johnson & Johnson in various positions and ownership of 19 Dunkin' Donuts. Today, he is a real estate agent and auto broker. Yesterday, he was a real estate agent and auto broker. But his real passion lies elsewhere. Fred's new vocation is transforming his family's devastation into substantive action, meaningful relationships, and genuine results. We have to do better. We can do better, Fred insists. He has collaborated with a broad range of people in this work and directed lacerating criticism at those blocking the way. Whether it is through Twitter, legislation, lawsuits, political campaigns, media appearances, or meeting with families of victims, policymakers, law enforcement officials, corporate leaders, community groups, and others, Fred has been voluble, relentless, and fearless. His efforts have specifically focused on funding research about this epidemic of gun violence, raising the minimum age for purchasing firearms, adding a waiting period for gun sales, developing a better system of background checks for firearms and ammunition, banning high-capacity ammunition magazines, banning bump stocks, expanding extreme risk protection orders, and undoing the unique legal immunity of gun manufacturers and dealers. Tonight, Fred is going to speak for about a half hour or so, and then we'll have a period of question and answers for also about a half hour or so, and then there will be a reception in the lobby to which you are all invited. The title of his presentation is Meaningful Moments in the Aftermath of Gun Violence. Please join me in welcoming back this 1988 graduate of Skidmore, Fred Guttenberg.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Because I can't, yeah, okay, I can hear myself now, right? We're good on volume? Yes. All right. Thank you for having me, everybody. Coming back to this campus, it feels like coming home. What's amazing is how much this campus has changed, but how it still feels the same. The crazy thing is the last time I was here was 2 years ago, 2 summers ago, for my family vacation, the last one I took while my daughter was still alive. One of the very last photos I have of my daughter was here on this campus. So coming here, it means a lot, and I just am very thankful that you all were able to get me here to do this. With that, I'm going to get started. As they said, I'm going to go, probably 30 or so minutes, but after that, I'm open for questions. There is no question that I don't answer. So I'm putting that out there right now. So don't hesitate. With that, I want you all to imagine your happy place. And do it now. Think of a vacation. Think of someone you love. For the kids in the room, you all just got an A on your exams today. Think of where you want to go For the seniors in the room, you all just found out today you're getting your dream job. But seriously, I want everyone to be in a peaceful, happy place. And just kind of looking around, is everybody there with me? Yeah? Yes. Boom! Just like that, you're the latest victim of gun violence. Just like that, your family, your life was turned upside down. That's the sound that I live with in my head every single day. My daughter, Jamie, was a victim of gun violence. And I go through every second of every day imagining what she felt like running down the hallway from an active shooter, knowing that he was intending to kill her, and knowing that sound is the very last thing she ever heard. People always say, I can't imagine how you feel. Well, I want you all to imagine how I feel. I want you all to think about being victims of gun violence. I want you all to think about someone you love being a victim of gun violence. I want you all to imagine what it would be like to get that phone call. And then I want you all to decide you're part of doing something about this. This is not something that requires silence. This is something that requires action, and it requires all of your voices. And I will tell you, I had a chance to spend time in some classes today with a lot of young people who asked a really simple question. What can we do? Imagine you're potentially a victim of gun violence, and what I would ask you to do is use your voice and use your power to vote. Your votes do matter. So with that, I have a question before we go any further. Who in this room wants to get shot? I don't see any hands, and that's a good thing. I spend my life now traveling this country, challenging people, going wherever I can to talk to those who are decision makers, because I don't want you to get shot. Kids in schools need to be safe, whether it's elementary, middle, high school, or college. But your parents, guess what? We need to make sure they're safe too. The adults, when you go to work, when you go shopping, anywhere you go, we need to make sure you're safe. And so we, together, need to decide this issue matters. With that, I'm going to tell you my story. And it did not start on February 14th. That's my brother. That's Dr. Michael Guttenberg. My brother was a true hero. He ran the triage for the World Trade Center. My brother, at the time of the World Trade Center attacks, was the deputy medical director of the New York Fire Department. He was in the World Trade Center before the second building even got hit. He was in the World Trade Center with about 10 other doctors when they started to hear noise. This was after both buildings got hit. They weren't sure what the noise was until stuff started falling on them. And they realized the towers were coming down. They hid out in a room that, for whatever reason, did not collapse. Everything around them turned to rubble. This room did not collapse. The door they went in was blocked, but they found another way out. And like most heroes, they didn't run. Instead of leaving, they went to the command post and they said, where do we go now? And my brother spent 16 days at ground zero treating people. I tell you that because in 2013, he got the cancer that comes from that. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which, just like having the World Trade Center fall on you, should have been a death sentence. But amazingly, my brother had surgery, chemo, and radiation, and for a while was told he was cancer-free until early 2016, when they started to find spots on his lungs. And as the year went on, spots on his stomach, spots on his liver. 2016 turned into a terrible year for him. When I sold my business in November of 2016, my life literally became one of every week going back and forth to New York to help take care of him. My brother wasn't married, he didn't have kids. And unfortunately for my brother, he passed away in October of 2017. The funeral that my brother had was both the most depressing day of my life and the most inspiring. My brother and I were very close, and through his illness, we got a lot closer. What he went through, what my family went through, what my parents went through, was the worst kind of suffering and pain you could imagine. The day he was buried, though, when I saw the way the first responder community showed up, the New York Fire Department, Northwell Health Systems, and his other employers, there had to be 80 emergency service vehicles, helicopter flyover. Being that I'm guessing a lot of you are from New York, you probably know the Southern State Parkway. They closed it for his funeral. My brother was buried a hero. And I'll never forget it. And I'll never forget that day thinking, this is out of control. I'll never be a part of something so painful again, and I'll certainly never be a part of a funeral like this again. But I was. That's my baby girl. A year and a half later, I still get choked up, but it's okay. On February 14, 2018, I sent 2 children to school. That's all I did. The day started like a normal day in my house. For those of you kids in this room with siblings or parents with multiple kids, you will understand when I say the day started with chaos. I had 2 children who were running late. They were blaming each other for running late, which, by the way, happened every morning. They were getting agitated with each other. My wife and I were getting agitated with them. And I had my 2 dogs, which were needing attention. What I remember about that morning, and it's going to haunt me forever, is rushing my children out the door. You got to get to school. You got to get to school. Go. Get out the door. You're going to be late. That's what I spent my final minutes telling my daughter, telling my son, because it wasn't supposed to be the last time I was ever supposed to see them. What I don't remember saying to my children that morning as I rushed them out the door are the simple words, I love you. Because it wasn't supposed to be the last time. And so for those of you who are listening to this today, I want to make sure that if you have people you love, don't ever waste a second not telling them that. Because you just don't know what's coming next. That day was a normal day for us. My daughter, usually keeping my wife up to date, on anything. If her shoelace becomes untied, she'll text my wife about it. My son, usually he's communicating with me. With cell phones today, well, it doesn't matter if you're in school, you're always communicating. And it was a normal day until just a couple of minutes after 2. I get a phone call from my son. And my son is a bit of a jokester. But the one thing you need to know about my son, he does not joke about his sister's safety. He watched after her like a hawk. And he calls me and he goes, Dad. And I'm like, what? There's a shooter at my school. I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't know if I should take him seriously. And he goes, and I can't find Jamie. The second he said that, I knew he was deadly serious. And I said, well, where are you? He goes, I'm running and I hear bullets. I said, then you run faster. And the bullets he was hearing were on the 3rd floor of the school. They were the ones killing his sister. My son is on the phone with me, and I'm just telling him, run, run, run. And he's too busy worrying about Jamie. I can't find Jamie. I need to find Jamie. And I'm like, I'll worry about Jamie, you run. Thank God my son made it off the campus. He actually made it to a Walmart just around the corner, which for those of you who have followed the story, you may also recall the kid who did the killing showed up at the Walmart too, blending in with the students, and was there when my son was there. Fortunately, I did get my son, and he did one of those Find My iPhone things. So we knew my daughter's phone was still in the building. And my wife, at the time, was on lockdown at a school across the street. My wife's a pediatric occupational therapist, and she was there visiting clients. So she's on lockdown. We're in two separate cars. I'm dealing with my son. She's trying to reach my daughter. As minutes rolled on, we started to panic more and more and more. I went on Facebook. I put out a message which included my personal cell number, which clearly the world has not lost, and asking anybody for news. What happened after that is all the kids that we knew my daughter would have been with started calling their parents. Our hope was my daughter just left her phone there, and that eventually she would use someone else's phone to call us. But as certain kids got to their parents, we knew it was different. So my wife and I are now at the point of hoping maybe she was taken to a hospital. Law enforcement was asking us to go to a Marriott hotel where they were setting up a staging area and having buses of kids brought. But we sent my daughter's dance team there. My daughter was this beautiful, amazing, competitive dancer. So her dance team went there to wait for us. My wife and I decided we're going to the hospital. After about an hour and a half at the hospital, it became clear that not only was she not there, they checked the other local hospitals, and she wasn't in the other local hospitals either. One of my very best friends, I'll talk about the story a little bit later, he's a police officer, and he found my daughter. And that's how she became the first publicly identified victim. So, here's what I want everyone here to do. Who's sitting in this room right now with somebody that you love? Just show of hands. Number one, I want you to tell that person you love them. And here's my next question. Of all you people sitting here with somebody you love, are any of you leaving here separately? So going home separately, so I want you to again look at that person now and tell them you love them like it could be the last time. I do this because if you're gonna fight for your right to be safe, you have to imagine what it's like to lose somebody you love because of gun violence. Because I didn't get the chance to say to my daughter that last time, I love you, and I don't want anyone else to miss the chance to say to somebody they love, I love you. Two, one of the things that you go through when you enter this crazy world of activism that I've entered, or when you go through this gun violence, is life-changing relationships. Every relationship I have has been altered. People who I knew, I got closer to. People who I never knew, who I have no right knowing, I got to know. These two guys turned out to be some of the most meaningful moments to me in the year and a half since my daughter was killed. The first person who I got to talk to and then meet was Vice President Biden, who called me about 10 days after Jamie was killed. He was actually on the train going from Virginia to New York, as he talks about all the time. He had me on the phone for about 45 minutes, and it wasn't a political conversation, and so he was freewheeling with F-bombs and everything else and just being a real guy, just a real guy. But all he wanted to know was about me. He wanted to know how my wife and my son were. He wanted me to tell him about Jamie. And he just wanted to let us know what to expect. He is a man who understands loss. At the end of the conversation, he let me know that he was going to be in Florida a few weeks later, in Palm Beach, at a fundraiser. And he asked me to meet him there. And he said I could bring one of the other parents. And so I did, actually. In 2 weeks from now, you have Max Schachter coming to town, who was like a brother to me. He's a dear friend. And Max is who I brought when I went to meet Vice President Biden. And if anybody wants to ask me any questions about all of that stuff happening in the community later, I'll be happy to answer. But Max and I went and we met Vice President Biden. What was so amazing is he was doing an event for his son Beau Biden's foundation at a house in Palm Beach. There had to be 200 people there. And he comes in and he's doing his thing, shaking everybody's hand. And at some point he kind of motions over to his assistant to get us and bring us into a private room. I figured we were going to be in there for 2 minutes. After the first 20 minutes of being in there with him, I said, "Don't you have a room full of people out there?" And he said, "This is more important." And he spent about 45 minutes with us. I'll never forget his advice. He spoke to me and Max about mission and purpose. And he talked to us about how that is how he got through loss, and how every day, if we find our purpose and we pursue our mission, the loss never goes away, the pain never goes away, but it goes a little further away. And he used specific examples of how that worked in his life after his losses. He also came prepared to talk to us about grief and how everyone grieves differently, and why he wanted us to know that, because we have spouses, we have children, and we're not all going to feel it the same way. And the reason he wanted us to know that is so that we actually could stay together. The advice he gave me is something that stays with me every second of every day. And I'm really thankful for him. Governor John Kasich, just over a year ago, asked me to come to Ohio to testify in front of their House and Senate. He's a man who wants to do something about gun violence. And Ohio is not an easy place to do that. And specifically, he wanted me to come and testify about red flag laws or extreme risk protection orders and how they're working in Florida. But before I got to do that, he spent quite a bit of personal time with me. And I'll never forget it because of how personal and deep he got with me on issues of faith and on healing. Now, I'll be very honest with people in this room. After the 2 losses that I've had, and I told Governor Kasich the same thing, my faith in a higher power is pretty shattered, pretty obliterated. But my faith, because of the people who I've met, is stronger than ever. It's just placed in a different place. Governor Kasich wanted to let me know that it was okay. He was still confident I would refine my faith in a higher power at some point in my life. But he was there to listen, to talk, to help me at a time where I needed it. I've just had this unbelievably great fortune of meeting wonderful people in the past year and a half, and these are 2 who have really changed the direction of my life, and I'm thankful for them. When I go out and I speak, I talk a lot about relationships and the changed relationships that are part of my life. There's no bigger changed relationship than that, the loss of my daughter. The relationship is no longer one of me holding her, talking to her, laughing with her. It's me now visiting her at a cemetery and hoping that there's that connection still between us. So for you all to understand why I do this all the time and why I do what I do and traveling and talking and harassing elected people, it's because of what I lost. It's because of my daughter. She was the energy in every room she went into. You were either laughing or screaming because of her, but you were always reacting to her. And I just want to give you an opportunity to see the beauty of my daughter, to get to know her. She was this amazing, beautiful, competitive dancer. And so with that, this is Jamie. That's my baby. The day after Jamie died, the day after Jamie was murdered, there's a lot about that day I just don't remember. However, I was asked to attend a vigil that night in Parkland for the community. And I decided to do so. I went with my sister and some friends. My wife and my son decided they didn't want to go. I get there, and the mayor asked me if I wanted to speak. And I had a lot, I guess I needed to get off my chest. I didn't go there prepared for a speech, but I guess I let it rip, and it changed me. That night is the night that my voice permanently became a part of this movement. I remember that night describing feeling broken, describing my family feeling broken. I remember that night where it hit me. We're victims of gun violence. You know, it didn't register the first 24 hours. Honestly, I was not fully with it. That night, talking to that crowd is when it registered, and it was the beginning of my public life. I went home that night, I told my friends and family that were at the house, I want to break that effing gun lobby. And for those of you in this room who are part of the gun lobby, it's not the membership I have issues with. It was the leadership. And that's what I went back and said. And I said it all week long. And it has become a part of my mission to remove the grip of that lobby on the legislators and legislation that get held hostage. I'm not going to quit. A few days later, I went to the CNN town hall. And that was my first experience taking on somebody who's supposed to be in a position of power greater than mine. And I realized, nope, they're not. And I haven't stopped challenging people since that night where Senator Rubio and I had our interaction. You know, people see moments like that and they think, I can't believe he just went up and did that. What people don't see is the second those moments end, I would go home and cry like a baby. And I'm just so thankful that in my life, I've had people who have stood by my side, who have held me up, people who I've known, people who I got to know because of this. Because let me tell you something, after events like this, you need that. I told you about feeling broken. I told you about my faith, but I want to reiterate how my faith, it's in this. It's the people who showed up here today. It is the amazing people across this country who I've met who want to do something about this. It is people who, in my life, I never thought I had a right to be with, whether they be politicians, entertainers, or athletes. You know, my faith comes from the meeting I had 3 weeks ago, sitting in Senator Ted Cruz's office for 90 minutes with Alyssa Milano and the three of us debating. You know, listen, that's not supposed to be my life. It wasn't supposed to be my life, but it is now, and I'm very thankful that we're having these opportunities to get our voices heard. So, you know, we're all part of the same human experience. I talked to you earlier about a friend of mine who's a police officer and whose life was forever changed because of what happened. He is one of those people who has been by my side. And what happened is, the day Jamie was killed, I never finished my story after going to the hospital. And I'm going to finish it now. When we learned that my daughter wasn't at any of the hospitals, my wife and I left. And remember, we were in separate cars. And we're driving back. And we're getting onto the highway. And we're probably 10 minutes from my house. While I was at the hospital, I called my friend Scott, who's a Coral Springs SWAT officer. He was on the scene earlier that day. And I said, she's not at the hospital. It was actually, yeah, when we were at the hospital, I called him. I said, you got to go back. You got to look. And so he did. And when we were driving home from the hospital, I called Scott. I said, any news? And he goes, meet me at the Marriott. And the Marriott was where law enforcement was using as a staging area, asking everybody to go. And I said, I just want to go home. Why do you want me to meet you at the Marriott? He goes, it's just the way they're trying to handle everything. He goes, just meet me there. I said, Scott, you've already been to the school. I don't need to go to the Marriott. I said, do you know something? And he broke down crying and said, she's gone. That is how Jamie became the first publicly identified victim. Before you know it, we're notifying friends because they kept on calling, and it ended up on social media. This is at about 5-something. By about 6:30, news helicopters flying over my house, phone ringing off the hook, and news people showing up. Thankfully for friends like Scott and some other law enforcement friends that I have, they made arrangements through several different police agencies to put police in front of my house for a week to keep media away. I'm not against the media. In fact, I'm very thankful for the media. I just didn't want it that week. And when I, again, talk about the aftermath of gun violence and the amazing reality of people who will surround you and lift you and help you, that's one example. The other example is my lifelong friend Jay. He lives about 2 hours from where we live. He was at my house that night, and he didn't leave for a week. When I tell you Jay did not leave my side, everywhere I needed to go, he drove. When we went to the funeral home to plan my daughter's funeral, Jay brought us. He didn't come in the room with us because he wanted us to have privacy, but he sat outside the room close enough to listen to every detail so that I wouldn't forget a thing. Okay? Again, my faith in a higher power shattered, but my faith, because of my faith in people, stronger than ever. I also don't want to forget to talk about the other families. People ask me all the time, you guys all talk? Do you get along? You know, and if you look at us on social media, we're not all in the same place, but we do talk. We share a bond that nobody should know of. We lost people that we love in the same school shooting, and we do talk, and we do communicate, and we do get together, and we do socialize. But that's the private part of our life. And candidly, for the first year after this happened, my wife and I, the only time we felt, I don't know if normal is the right word, but a little better, was when we were with these families. I tell them all the time, I hate that I know you, but I love you. Congressman Deutsch. And again, it gets to amazing people who give you faith. Now, I don't know if you all know Congressman Deutsch. He's my congressman in Florida. The way I got to know him was the night my daughter was buried. He wasn't able to make it to the funeral, but his amazing wife, Jill, had a mutual friend with my sister. And she reached out to this mutual friend to see if they could come pay a Shiva call at our house that night. I originally said no. I did not want political people in my house. And Jill was persistent. My sister's friend was persistent. My sister was persistent. And eventually I ended up saying, they can come, they have 10 minutes. That's what I remembered until a later date, because Jill reminded me, now I remember it all, that I greeted them in the driveway. But it wasn't so much a greeting as it was setting the ground rules. Apparently I went out there and I told them, I didn't want you here. I don't want political people in my house. You have 10 minutes. And apparently I put my finger wagging in Ted's face and I said, I blame everybody in your town and I'm going after everyone, and you're either with me or you're against me, and you better be with me. Well, one thing I can tell you, he's been with me privately, publicly, as a friend, and as an advisor. What I can also tell you is they didn't leave my house after 10 minutes. In fact, they spent pretty much the rest of the night there, and our families fell in love. They are wonderful people. I also would be remiss if I didn't talk about how my relationship with all of the kids changed. I am so appreciative and thankful for the children in this country, for the kids, yes, you guys. Those March for Our Lives kids, I knew them before this happened. I thought they were just a bunch of knuckleheads. And I was wrong. I also am one of those parents who told all these kids, this thing is destroying you. It's ruining you. You don't know how to communicate. I was wrong about that too. What I learned after this is not only do all of you kids know how to communicate, you do know what you want. You're fierce about asking for it. And this thing that I thought was ruining you became your weapon in so many different ways. You guys had the kids at MSD. While the shooting was happening, they recorded. You can't ignore the violence of that shooting. It's here. But what I also discovered is the ability of kids to communicate, organize, and connect because of this thing is a powerful tool that we adults haven't yet figured out. And so rather than destroying our nation's youth, this thing became their weapon. And I could not be more proud of the kids from my community and across this country that I have met. You really all are all amazing. And I just hope you all remember you have these amazing voices and to use them. This is America today. 40,000 people a year die from gun violence. It's not all homicide. About half of that is suicide, but that's still a gun-related death. About 23,000 a year injured because of guns. And what it boils down to is about 100 per year who die, 100 per day who die because of guns. It's not normal. It's not okay. This is what we need to work to fix. Now, my mission and what I'm leading to do is to cut that 40,000 in half within 10 years. If you look at where we've been, look at back to 9/11 with my brother. This country did something. You haven't seen another 9/11-like moment in this country. And we need to do the same thing with gun violence. Now, it's changing. If you look at city by city, state by state, the House of Representatives, legislation is slowly passing. In some cases, not so slowly. If you look at what's happening in the business community, they are leading. And that started with Dick's Sporting Goods. I heard someone clap, and that's okay. They have been leaders. I have a connection to Dick's. The VP of marketing at the time that my daughter was killed was a personal friend of mine. He was the VP of marketing at Dunkin' Brands when I was a franchisee. So when this happened in Parkland, they had a direct personal connection to what happened in our community. And my friend went to Ed Stack, the CEO of Dick's Sporting Goods, and spoke to him about that connection and said, we need to change. We need to do something. And they did. And what people don't know is 2 weeks, 3 weeks after this happened in Parkland, Ed Stack and his executive team came down and met with my family and the other families to talk about their plan, their commitment to doing something about gun violence, and they have not wavered. And you know what? America is rewarding them. And so with the leadership of the business community and with the leadership of many across this country, step by step, little by little, things are changing. And we will get this done. Why? Because we can't go back to 40,000 a year dying of gun violence. Your lives are worth it. You're entitled to grow up. You're entitled to see your children grow up, and we need to do better than this. While I stand here with you today, based on the numbers, someone is learning they're a victim of gun violence, someone just got done burying a victim of gun violence, and someone is planning a funeral for a victim of gun violence. That's happening across this country right now. It's not normal. It's not okay. One of the things people always ask me is, how do you want to fix this? What do you want to do? And I know you read off a bunch of the things that we're working on, but I want to talk about this. Because again, it comes from these amazing relationships that I have no right having that I never expected to have in my life. And one of them is Congressman Wasserman Schultz, Congresswoman. She's down in Florida, not far from where I live. And just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, I was in her office because she just wanted to know how my family was doing, how I was doing, how the advocacy was going. And she asked me a question that I wasn't able to answer. She asked me well, actually, we got into a conversation about the gun lobby, and I said, I thought most of their arguments weren't very persuasive, with the exception of one, and I didn't know how to handle it. And the argument that I couldn't handle was when they say, there's already 300 million weapons on the streets of America, you can't do anything to reduce gun violence. The guns are already there. That's not a thing that I was comfortable with responding to because it's not wrong. And so she said, there is something we can do. If you're a prohibited purchaser of firearms by law, you are also prohibited from buying ammunition. Problem is, there's no requirement for a background check on ammunition. So you could get your weapon, you could steal it, private transfer, any number of ways. You're a bad guy who wants to kill. You can't go to a store to buy the weapon because you're a prohibited purchaser. You get your weapon, but then you can walk into any old store and buy the bullets. And by extending background checks to ammunition, you could start saving lives immediately. So we decided to file this bill, and it's called Jamie's Law. And it's been filed in the House, it's been filed in the Senate. It was supposed to come up for a hearing later this year. There's some things happening in Washington these days that seems to be shutting everything else down. However, we're working on it across the states as well. There are several states that are in the process of enacting this. I'm actually meeting with the governor here tomorrow. And so steps to save lives. No bans, nobody losing weapons unless you predictably have an intention to kill. With that, I want to close by talking to you all about moments in life. And we all have those moments that feel like the worst moment. Maybe you blew an exam that you studied hard for. Maybe a boyfriend or a girlfriend issue. A fight with somebody you love. For the adults in the room, a problem at work or in the business. Really horrible moments that feel like the worst. And yet, fast forward a few weeks or a month, most of the time you don't remember those moments. Listen, I've been unemployed and not sure how to pay the bills. I've been an employee of Johnson & Johnson with the highs and lows that go with that. I had my business, and trust me, with the highs and lows that go with that. What I can tell you is there isn't a single moment that comes close to what I went through with my daughter. And I tell you this, and this is really directed a lot at the kids. I want you all to understand the lessons of perspective. I want you all to understand what big moments are versus moments that will pass. I also want you all to understand your strength and your resilience. You know, in this country's history, it's in the really big moments where this country's heroes and leaders are born. What sometimes seem like the worst moments. You look at something like a 9/11, or you look at what happened at my daughter's school and the first responders in law enforcement who did step up, who have been there, who I consider heroes. Across this country, it's in the worst moments, the most horrible moments, where people do step up and do heroic things. What seems like your worst moment could turn into your moment to be a leader and to be a hero. And so what I want to say to you all is In life, moments happen. What ultimately dictates how you go through life isn't the moment, it's how you react to it and how you respond to it. What I'm doing today, responding to what happened to my daughter, is hopefully something that you can look at and say, if that guy can get up and do this, then I know I can do anything. I am looking to you kids to be this country's future heroes and leaders. I am looking to you to get through your moments. I think back to a class like BU 107. I don't know what they call it now. But I remember when we had those presentations that we had to do. And I remember sitting through those presentations thinking how stressful it was and what a hard moment, and where they would throw like a little roadblock in the middle of your presentation to totally mess up the moment. And some people probably do lose it in the moment, and some people react and succeed. Every one of you guys and girls, women, has the ability to not be defined by your moment, but to be defined by how you react to your moment. And so with that, when your moments come, don't get lost in the weight of the moment. Figure out how you can react and move forward. And I look forward to seeing you in the years ahead as the future leaders and heroes of this country. Thank you. Ooh, I spoke longer than I thought. I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was going to take I told you, I don't like it.
That's okay.
Thank you so much.
I know Fred is eager to hear your questions or comments. So if you have something to say, please make your way to a microphone on one of the sides. We'd like to hear as many people as possible. Maybe state your name, and let's keep it brief so we can try to get as many voices in as possible. Please. Yeah.
Working. So I'm Jamie.
Hey, Jamie.
I wrote it down because I'm bad at it.
That's okay.
My assumption is that many mass shooting perpetrators are going to be first-time offenders, or like they won't have a criminal record, or like a history of mental health issues. So how would you plan on? Is there even a way to vet those gun sales?
So, number one, it's not always based upon a mental health history. You know, there are other factors that go into background checks. There's criminal and other things. I mean, a lot of states, if you have a background with substances or alcohol. So there's a lot of factors that go into a background check. If you're a first-time buyer and you have a record, you're not going to be able to pass a background check. So it's not about being a first-time buyer or a second-time buyer. Now, if you're someone who doesn't have a record and can pass a background check, but you haven't yet committed a crime, you know, sometimes that does happen, and that's where things like extreme risk protection orders become important, because law enforcement has to have the ability to remove weapons from somebody who becomes a known threat or risk. So, thank you.
Ma'am?
My name is Ruth, and I also have lost a loved one to gun violence. I lost my nephew nearly 5 years ago, so thank you. And I'm sorry also for your loss. Your daughter was beautiful. So much of what you say resonates with me. I really don't have a question as much as I just wanted to comment and say thank you for all the work that you've done. Thank you for your advocacy, and keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Fred, thank you so much for being here. We had, fortunately, met in Florida. I used to live down there, and I have been involved with campaigns, and I had a chance to meet you down there. And I guess it's the club that we don't want to belong to
No.
because of the circumstances. And so I believe that the political process is very important for us to make change. So please, thank you very much for reminding people that they have the power of the vote and they have their voice. So the question seems to have become around people being stigmatizing mental health issues, and let's make red flag laws, let's harden our schools, let's be afraid. And I think that the process has to be, where do we bring responsibility? We are all trained and taught how to own our cars, how to take care of them. We learn how to take care of our cell phones. And why is the conversation not about registration, licensing, locking them up, ensuring that you're not hoarding weapons, but stigmatizing individuals instead of teaching responsibility? And why are our legislators so afraid to go against the NRA?
Thank you.
Listen, it's a great question. What you just spelled out is just common sense approaches to dealing with gun violence that does not alienate anybody's Second Amendment rights.
Exactly.
And so it shouldn't be complicated. However, there's a very powerful lobby that spends a lot of money to prevent legislators from seeing it that way. And that is the reason why it is so important to break the grip of this lobby on legislators. It is the reason why our vote matters. If you care about your safety, you want to put legislators in place who are going to vote to do something about your safety and not buy into the arguments that doing steps like that means they're taking my guns. Because that's not what's happening. So I fully get it, and I appreciate your question.
And thank you for doing this. We should also remember that Bush Sr. actually rescinded his membership to the NRA because he said it had become an organization that he didn't believe in. And so it's not just, it is about an organization that is sort of qualifying what gun ownership means, and it isn't about that. It's about enjoying what you have and being responsible about it.
Yep.
So thank you very much for doing your work and continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Tricia.
Hey,
I'm
Tricia.
Local in the community here in Saratoga. I've worked in activism on gun violence prevention for the past 4 years, and it's great to see everybody here, and I'm so thankful that you're here to share your story and get people inspired to do something about this issue. Recently in our town, we've had a disagreement about policy in our schools,
I've heard.
which it's been a really divisive thing, pitting neighbors against neighbors and PTA members against PTA members. And my question for you would be, how do you sustain a community when there's such differences in opinions and policy?
You know, strangely, this community is doing something over the course of this visit and 2 weeks from now that may help. Because the other side of the argument here is bringing my good friend Max Schachter in. And Max is a wonderful guy. And Max is going to talk about securing schools, making schools safer, hardening schools. Max agrees with, I think, what I've heard everyone here in this room say, which is I don't think I've heard anyone in this room say you have an issue with armed guardians, trained, armed, with a reporting structure. And it sounds to me like what was happening here before, which is what the other side wants to bring back, were, while I recognize they were retired law enforcement, they weren't trained to be on school campuses dealing with the everyday realities of school violence and emotional things that happen in schools. And they didn't have a reporting structure. They weren't accountable to anybody. So it seems to me what's happening is this group doesn't want that. Now, all those people who were there before, if they want to be protecting kids on school campuses, then they ought to go through the process of being trained for it and being part of the structure to be held accountable. And maybe when Max comes in 2 weeks, now that this community on both sides are hearing Max and I essentially delivering the same message, maybe it'll be an opportunity for you guys to all talk together without the vitriol, to realize maybe you're not so far apart. You all love your children. You all want your children safe. You all want your educators safe. And if we can talk about it from the perspective of how do we ensure that, I hope it'll help to bring people together. If the other side of this thought they were bringing Max in to create a knockdown, drag-out fight, they're going to be disappointed because Max is like a brother to me, you know? So they're going to be disappointed. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you for coming out and speaking with the Skidmore community. I think everybody in this room can say that we all really appreciate it,
Thank you.
and just hearing your perspective. So my mom's a preschool teacher, and when she went to college to teach little 4 and 5-year-olds how to color and how to play. And you know, hearing these reports and hearing these news, you know, not only thinking about the students, of course, but also thinking about the teachers. How have your conversations with those teachers been? What kind of perspectives have you gotten from them? Because my mom went to school to teach children, not to hold a gun. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Most teachers who I have met don't want to go to school to hold a gun, they want to teach. And educators should focus on educating. Educators should focus on making sure their students are learning, emotionally growing, socially growing, and focusing on protecting those kids in a lot of ways, but thinking that while trying to get their kids protected, should a mass killer walk onto a campus with an AR-15, they're not going to have the chance. They're not going to have the time. And so, listen, trained security, let them secure. You know, it's fine. They're trained. I get it. They're armed. It's all they do. But teachers should teach, administrators should administer, and security should secure. So I hope that in your community and where your mom teaches, that the idea of arming teachers does not become a reality.
I think we got time for one more question. Two more questions. 2 short questions.
Okay. Hi. Do I have to say my name?
That's up to you.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm Malik. I'm a junior. So I had a question about something that you said, or several things that you said. You mentioned that we have not had another 9/11, and we've made efforts to make sure that doesn't happen. And you said that we should make expedient efforts to make sure that there's 2/14.
February 14th, the day my daughter was killed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention that the efforts to prevent another 9/11, some of the efforts were like the Patriot Acts, which were highly discriminatory and often hurt innocent people. And I know that even after Parkland, some students of color reported that they felt more antagonism for school safety officers. And I know that you mentioned a lot of practicality in your efforts and finding practical ways to solve the issue. So I was wondering if you've considered how laws, rules, and efforts that you can make that will potentially not affect the marginalized more, and particularly policy in schools.
Well, so I think it's a great question, and I was teaching. I was in your class today, and a similar question came up. And listen, You asked a very complicated question about the relationship in this country that we have with each other and the way we treat one another. And, you know, and the students in Parkland that you're talking about, I know them personally, I speak to them, I travel with them, and I do know how they feel. And I've been with them when they've given their speeches, and I am supportive of them and their concerns. I think in this country, we have to figure out a way, and it requires leadership that doesn't exist right now, but a way to talk to one another that doesn't lead us to feeling as if we're not all working on the same page. My fight for safety is a fight for safety for everybody. You know, when I was down with the Hunger Nine in Miami, and I don't know if you know who they are, but they're a group of men in Miami who got tired in their community of all the gun violence. And they went on I think it was a 19-day hunger strike. I go into the communities that you're talking about. I was in Cincinnati, which just in June had its deadliest month on record, and people don't talk about it because it's in the minority communities, and it's, you know, one-off shootings, it's not mass shootings. And my fight for safety, it's for everybody, you know, it's not, and so we have to find a way to work together and talk the same language and not be afraid to take steps to keep weapons from those who intend to kill, because that protects you as well. I do fear in this country right now, and again, there's a lack of leadership where people can't talk, but different communities and minorities and different populations and law enforcement and like distrust, you know what I'm saying? And some of it is legitimate and built into law. And some of it is not built into law, but it's based off of examples of things that just truly happened. And so I can only tell you my mission, my goal is to reduce gun violence in all of our communities. And by extending background checks, by raising the age to 21, by eliminating high-capacity magazines, by getting research on gun violence to find out where it's happening, why it's happening, and the cost of it happening. You know, all of these different things, it's there for all of our safety. So within the schools, I get it. I get the concern that armed guardians are a potential risk more to certain populations. I get it. And you know, I don't know if that means we don't do it. It means we have to figure out a way to do it and make people trustful of it and hope that it does work to reduce gun violence in schools. You know, listen, I have my fears on some potential negative things that could come of putting more guns into schools. I mean, the reality is you add more guns into a school than normal everyday school violence, you have potential other risks. I wish I had a better answer for you. I can tell you my mission and my goal is everybody's safety.
I wonder if you might want to follow up, and if you do, I would invite you to do so momentarily in the reception, where you guys can have a conversation. Why don't we have one more quick question here, and then we'll move into the reception.
Hi, I'm Hannah Davis.
Hey, Hannah.
Hi, and I looked up your social media page before I came here, and I really liked what you posted about disinformation. I'm a very big proponent about the media being truthful about what they report on, and I noticed in July 26th of this year, CNN came out with a report that there was 22 school shootings so far this year, and I was wondering your opinion on that, considering I looked more into it because I stand very skeptical of anything that comes out of news media platforms. and only 2 of them actually were resulted in any deaths, and almost half had nothing to do with the school itself. They just happened on or near school grounds. And I was wondering what you were going to do to combat disinformation about guns in the media.
I'm not really sure where to go with that. You know, what I put out there does not include disinformation. And I think in the media, you know, the reality is, while not every instance of school violence with a gun has resulted in a casualty, we should all be saying thank God for that. You know, but the fact that the gun found itself in a place where that could have been an outcome is concerning. And, you know, and again, the reality is 40,000 people a year die in this country because of guns. 23,000 are injured. So in some of those instances, did it only result in an injury? Did it result in somebody being incapacitated? I don't know. I personally do believe that whether it's media, print, television, radio, or online, we do have a problem in this country right now with a lot of things that get put out there that aren't always factual. And that is concerning to me because sometimes some of those things take on a life of their own. But most of the data that I have seen shared with regards to gun violence, I don't share it unless I see how it's sourced. And if it's worthwhile data, I will share it. So, you know, most of the disinformation or bad information typically finds itself online on some of these crazy pages and things that people put out there. You know, I don't know that I have the ability to change the data that you're talking about. I'm not really sure where to go with your question, but I agree with you. The right information is important.
I have a little follow-up question.
Yeah.
Can I just suggest we take that to the reception because we're way out of time.
Okay.
I went way over. I didn't realize.
Thanks for coming. Go to the
I didn't
reception.
realize how long.
Thanks for your question. Thanks for coming. Sorry, didn't you? Yeah, sorry.